Well, greetings. It's Dr. Dean Blevins, and I wanted to take this moment in the semester to sort of frame the rest of our work as the semester continues to the end. Just a reminder, as we began this class, we started with the general task of discipleship, or for some of you, you might have grown up understanding it as Christian education, or you might have even thought about it through the language of Christian formation. In this program, catechesis is the term that's overarching vision of Christian formation that we use to kind of describe this whole work. And as we engage, we began to also take on, the challenges that Christians in our everyday life now face through the language of James K. Smith and others over the kind of dominant culture or secular liturgies that at times impinge upon the life of the church and definitely upon individual persons within both within and beyond the church, and use social media as sort of a case study, particularly the culture around social media, sort of the new mall, if you will, in a digital age. That brought us to contemplate how to respond through the life of the church and what do we mean by the church and how to begin to think about discipleship, not merely in individual categories, but particularly in and through the fullness of what the body of Christ, known as the church, might have to offer, and how our understanding of the church actually influences then the practices that we engage. And then stopped, if you will, to take a kind of historical deep dive, which we're just now sort of coming out of at this point. That included, yes, Robin Jensen's book on baptismal imagery, and particularly those five really deep theological themes that were associated with baptism of that period. If you think about that as a cultural immersion, so that this idea of cleansing from sin and sickness, or incorporation into community, or sanctifying and illuminating power that comes in and through our participation within the life of baptism, from this idea of dying and rising. You might even think about that both through the language of cruciformity, but also the promise of the resurrection. And yes, leading into the power of the new creation. And what does that mean for those of us who participate within the Christian life? And I want to stress that we chose that kind of historical review just to remind us that baptism was really designed to mean more than merely, a single peculiar moment in time related to salvation. For some of us, that is very important. And I agree that for many traditions, it truly is. But really, what is it that baptism was intended to teach us about the fullness of the Christian life is something that we've often overlooked in the midst of the other discussion. Since then, yes, we've dealt with Augustine and really began to look at what authentic teaching looked like through this bishop from Hippo, and understanding the fullness of what this pastoral office, if you will, has to offer when we think about catechesis as a more prominent pastoral formation across the life of the church, as well as very intense preparation to actually participate in one's baptism and to have a good beginning as one first starts. And we're sort of coming out of that period, though we have looked a little bit at, yes, grounded in the gospel also, to get a slightly different vision of what that looks like, particularly in light of the Reformation and why all of a sudden catechesis became so important again and what that entailed. And so we have really catechesis understood either through these broad general categories of baptism and these broad theological themes that you have, I hope, used then to sort of wander around inside your local congregation and ask, where might these appear? And think about maybe even the possibilities of places where they might be nurtured and improved. Then you also have within Packer and Parrott, and as you'll continue to read, very detailed approaches, a lot more, sort of reformed in its organization and pattern, that really do provide a different kind of way of also asking where these themes, these 5, 4, 3, 2 themes, particularly thinking about it through those particular lenses, also show up within the life of the church. And we are now moving into So what does that look like? Well, I will say that you will have one more opportunity to sort of engage your own local congregation, much like you did theologically in doing sort of a theological analysis through the 5 baptismal themes. You'll also look at it through a more uh, deliberative approach using practicing our faith or practices of life that really also ask how is it that the church practices its way into catechesis. So there's practices of love, excuse me, that will be also a part of what you'll be engaged in. But why? Well, ultimately, the goal is to begin to think about how is it that you might work within a given congregation as a team to envision for the sake of that one congregation how it might be more faithful in its catechesis as it moves forward. Now, you'll be relying probably on one person that has either a particular church or sometimes a very specific ministry context that has at least enough elements around it to feel like the life of the church. So sometimes there are certain types of campus ministries, or I've even seen certain types of new church plants that fit this kind of conversation. But you're really beginning to think about how do we help a community that is designed to at least mirror the life of the church engage in this from a pastoral perspective, this formative life together through the various elements that that community already offers and perhaps suggestions of other things. Now, if this really still feels odd as a discipleship class or a Christian education class, you'll note that we haven't used some of the kind of typical language that you might have heard if you took undergraduate work in this area, things about learning styles or curriculum design or different approaches to Bible study, that kind of sort of survey work. And just so you know, we could do that. Actually, I have co-written a book that does just that called Discovering Discipleship. So yes, that approach was available. But what we really wanted to accomplish in this class is to kind of take a pause on what we truly mean about the catechetical life, the fullness of what catechesis is, not just catechism, and really focus both on how do we prepare people, particularly as they enter into the life of the church, to give them a very good beginning, but also what is our pastoral responsibility in making a difference within the lives of people who are already part of the church, believers, maybe even people who've been regular members, but yet have more fullness left for them to explore, particularly if we understand the broad array of what baptism has tried to communicate in the arc of the Christian life and the possibilities of catechesis that go on within that. And now we're going to look at a given church. So I did want to make just a couple of comments as we move forward. Number one, going back to this approach, the more what we would call a schooling paradigm has been sort of understood primarily since the Enlightenment as the primary model in which a lot of Christian education occurred. And there's a lot of good in that model. So it's not like we throw it out. But quite intentionally, this course was designed to get us back to more of the early church's sort of embrace, remind us that there were really thoughtful teachers in the early church. There was very deliberative formational practices that were a part of the early church. And yes, those can still be sort of interpreted in and through our day to day, albeit they look quite different than sometimes those rituals that we encountered in the reading, or even some of Augustine's suggestions at times that we might feel, well, it's a little bit awkward. But how do you take the richness of that era and begin to sort of reimagine the life of a given community so that it might actually deepen its own journey within this catechetical environment and have each believer sort of be enriched? Well, obviously, the most important thing you'll need to adopt is a pastoral perspective. Now, truthfully, almost every church has certain constraints, things that it just can't accomplish, and it has certain limits in light of its heritage, its history, sort of the things that that sometimes just due to size, either too big or too small, or sometimes due to tenure, the church is fairly young, or it has matured extensively and is in a different phase of life. that you recognize, are the things that constrain what can be accomplished. But the course is not merely designed to critique a congregation. It really is designed to enter into the life of that congregation and listen to it carefully as pastors, and then ask, where might we make a difference as we work collaboratively and build a strategy, if you will, to at least improve the faithfulness, deepen the catechetical life within that congregation as much as reasonably can be expected. And so I hope you hear that, even as you did your own sort of analysis of your personal congregation you're a part of, and you'll be doing that again with practices, you could do that in a way that just radically critiques that church. But I hope you didn't. I hope you also began to discover the strengths, the sort of the sometimes hidden curriculum or hidden resources that are there, so that you could tap into what the church has to offer as much as you decried what it doesn't have. And in the same way, we'll be trusting that that's what you'll be doing as a team when you're working with one of your classmates who probably has a real investment in that congregation. And we hope that the work that you'll do will actually make a difference there. I hope that what you envision as a team might actually help a congregation move a little bit further down the road. The stronger the analysis, the stronger you really pay attention to, how that church operates, either through the baptismal themes or through Packer and Parrott or through the practices, the more perhaps you get a clearer understanding of what that church has already to offer and what you can add to that. If there is a need for a good beginning, you can begin thinking about that. But I hope you understand that rather than merely just focus on a baptismal rite or sometimes even a catechesis of instruction, you also think about how you tie those people as they make that journey into the full life of the church. I hope that becomes part of your conversation as well, so that, yes, you provide a good beginning, but you also provide handholds into the rest of the life of that church. As you do that, I hope you begin to understand that actually the congregation or the ministry context becomes part of the teaching, learning environment. That the same way you've learned through the reading and through the online interaction with each other, which I hope by now you've really begun to understand and trust each other as well, and understand the strengths that you have to offer to each other. Not only as you've engaged those two, but now you'll begin to listen carefully to a congregation, to what it has to offer, not only in how you might help it, but what it has to offer to help deepen your own understanding of the power of the body of Christ, the church, in a very specific place to provide catechesis. And so by the time this class is over, I hope that you will find yourself embedded within multiple communities of fellow classmates, the reading and the sort of deep well of history, the funded knowledge of others who we have been reading about and thinking about, but also a living, breathing community of faith that probably is articulated through one of your classmates, but still nevertheless becomes a part of your own learning while you're here. This is the power of this form of approach to a curriculum construction. Yeah, I could lecture. You're probably already tired of hearing my voice even in this lecture, but really the places that you learn is in the way in which you bring the intersection of a deep, rich history, cherished colleagues you're working with, and a living congregation together. That nexus provides the fullness of your own theological formation and ministry preparation in and through this class. So I hope you will enjoy the rest of the course. It will get maddening, I know, and there'll be instructions on how to write and make sure that the paper is well presented. All of that will come. But I hope you by now are already postured, even before we finish the last set of analysis, to really begin to anticipate what a given congregation within a given community of co-learners might bring when you bring this funded knowledge that you've been encountering into that conversation. You will have one more reading, an age level reading. It's not necessarily contemporary in that sense of the term, but it is complementary in certain ways to the rest of the work we've been doing. So it at least speaks within a more contemporary context, and it takes seriously age level considerations. But I hope you understand that merely is supplemental resource to the more full life of that congregation and how you choose to engage that. So blessings to you, and we do look forward to seeing you online. God bless.